A very warm welcome to this, our fourth event in our series Voices from the Portal, Reimagining Our Post-Pandemic World. For those of you who don't know Interfaith Glasgow as a charity, we promote and facilitate friendship building, dialogue and cooperation between people from diverse religion and belief backgrounds. Currently, all our events and activities are online, one upside of which is the ability to engage internationally and to engage new audiences. So if you're joining us from far away from Glasgow this evening, or if you're joining us for the first time, you are most welcome, as of course are all those of you based in Glasgow. Our Voices from the Portal series invites people of all faith and belief backgrounds to come together to reflect on some of the key issues that have been highlighted by the pandemic, to consider what we've learned, what opportunities have emerged, and what changes we want to see in relation to key issues ranging from poverty, racism, and the cultivation of kindness, to mental health, changes in religious practice, and today, the climate crisis. Now, Interfaith Glasgow is not unique in hosting conversations about how we build back better after the pandemic, but our particular focus is on creating contexts for conversations in which a variety of religion and belief perspectives can be heard, and in creating opportunities for people to engage intentionally and deeply across religious and cultural boundaries when addressing important issues that affect us all. As I've explained at the start of previous events in this series, the series title, Voices from the Portal, was inspired by the words of Indian writer Arundhati Roy. In case this is the first event you've attended, I'll return again to her words. She writes, "Historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. This one is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. We can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcass of our prejudice and hatred, our avarice and dead ideas, our dead rivers and smoky skies behind us. Or we can walk through lightly, with little luggage, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight for it." Now, there is perhaps no single issue that more urgently demands that we imagine our world anew and be ready to fight for it than that of the climate crisis. In the last few years, the scale and urgency of the challenge we're facing has become uncomfortably clear. 200 species become extinct every day. In 2017, a football pitch-sized swathe of rainforest was destroyed every second. A rubbish truckload of plastic is dumped in the ocean every minute. The devastating effects of climate change and extreme weather conditions are felt daily. And global carbon emissions have risen by more than 60% since the first UN climate summit in 1995 and continue to rise despite scientific predictions of irreversible catastrophe if we do not reduce our emissions by at least 50% within the next decade. Now, during the pandemic, there's been a lot of talk of when we can return to normal. But is that what we really want when normal has us on a course to environmental catastrophe and we're reaching tipping points that place us at crisis point? It's a sobering indicator of the depth of the change that's required that even the restrictions on business as usual that we've seen during the pandemic have not had a significant impact on the problem. Although reduced air travel and car usage saw a reduction in CO2 emissions for a time, studies have shown that in many places, air quality is quickly returning to pre-lockdown levels. Plastic consumption has increased, alas, due to the huge demand for PPE equipment and restaurants and cafes switching to single-use equipment. And April saw deforestation in the Amazon increasing, with up to 64% more land being cleared than in the previous year due to illegal loggers, miners and ranchers. COP26, the UN Climate Summit, was postponed by a year. Now taking place in Glasgow in November 2021, it will be the biggest summit the UK has ever hosted, and it is being described as the most significant climate event since the 2015 Paris Agreement, where countries will report back on their progress and hopefully agree new, more ambitious goals. Little was achieved last year at COP25 in Madrid, and there is so much at stake. Concerted action is urgently required of us all. But how do we move beyond anxiety and despair to get ourselves motivated? And what action can people from diverse faith and belief communities take that will make a difference? Although the negative impact of human activity on the planet has continued while our attention has been on coping with the pandemic, one positive outcome of the way we have lived this year may be the changes that have been taking place in many people's hearts and minds. Crucially, many people have reported developing a deeper sense of connection with the natural world during lockdown. Is there some way we can harness this greater sense of connection and use it to reorientate our relationship with nature so that we're more willing to make the changes that tackling this crisis demands? And can we help build a movement for climate action that embraces the massive contribution that faith communities can make, particularly when they work together? Joining us this evening to kick off our discussion of these questions are two fantastic speakers. Rabia is a qualified herbalist and co-founder of the Rabbani Project, a not-for-profit community collective dedicated to the exploration of creativity, nature, and spirituality. She is the co-founder of Green Dean Tribe Retreats, which help Muslim women explore and strengthen their connection to the divine and to nature. Pleasure to have you with us this evening, Rabia. Really looking forward to your contribution.
Thank you so much, Rose, and thank you so much to the whole of Interfaith Glasgow. Really, I'm in a space of like deep gratitude, really grateful that we're able to kind of sit in this space and sit with this intention of connecting and having this really powerful conversation. Just before I kind of begin, if possible, I just want to kind of start with maybe 3 breaths, just 3 deep breaths, as a way of really centering myself, if I'm going to be honest. But then also, as I really appreciate Rose's introduction, but there were certain things in there she was talking started to cause a bit of like tension in my body. As I realized, you know, some of it caused tension in my body because some of the statistics that she was saying really. So I'm just going to take 3 deep breaths, and I'm just going to begin with the opening chapter of the Quran, which is Al-Fatiha. So you're more than welcome to join me with those deep breaths. So I'm just going to start. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Ar-Rahmanir Rahim. Maliki Yawmiddin. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين 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 يا رب العالمين. And that's just the beginning, the first chapter of the Quran, the opening. And I pray that this evening is an opening for us all. It opens up opportunities, it opens up change, it opens up movement in our hearts, our minds, and our bodies. As Rose said, I am Rabia Mali, co-founder of the Rabbani Project and founder of the Green Dean Tribe. The Green Dean Tribe was set up in 2015, and it was set up particularly to create a space where the inner and outer aspects of stewardship would be able to be nourished, and particularly in a way that felt authentic and was rooted in the prophetic tradition, the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and the Islamic sacred text. And particularly for myself, I've always loved nature, always had a connection to nature, and that's part of the work that I do as a herbalist. And in a lot of the spaces and the gatherings that I found myself in, I found that there was this huge gap when it came to the conversation of Islam and nature. A lot of the times, the traditions that were drawn from was still an opportunity for me to learn, and by all means, I learned a huge amount. But there was a lot of kind of code-changing and having to kind of apply things in a way that was very relevant to my religion and to my spirituality. And so that's where Green Dean Tribe came from. It was a response to that. And that's kind of what we've been doing since 2015. And I think I'll talk a little bit more about the exacts of what we're doing a little bit later. I want to dive straight in, to be honest. How do we get off the road to ruin? I thought that was a really powerful question, and I'm not gonna lie. When I first heard the question that Magdalene sent me, I was like, I don't know. I don't know how we get off the road to ruin. To be honest, that's the question I've been asking myself for the past however many years. I just sat there. I was like, I really actually don't know the answer to this. I could waffle, which I'm very good at, but I really need to kind of approach this question and approach this idea in a way that kind of makes sense to me, and a way that I could view it in a way that was manageable to me. And in a way, so what I ended up kind of approaching it in is, how do we heal? Right? How do we heal this separation, this the wounds of separation? And that's very much with the work that I do. Again, in some of the other work that I do as a herbalist, it's very much about how do we heal the wounds of separation. And I do honestly believe that climate change is a huge symptom, right? A huge symptom. And I really want to stress with the word symptom. It's a huge symptom of imbalance and disconnect, right? Among other things, but mainly imbalance and disconnect. And when I started to kind of really see climate change and all the symptoms of climate change and all the different things that we were seeing, some of the things that even Rose mentioned, the forest fires, the increased pollution, the extinction of species, greed, right? Greed, capitalism, consumerism, fast fashion, even our connection to food, like fast food. All of this I started to see as, yes, definitely something where solutions are needed, but I started to understand it as being a symptom. And one thing that really made me start to see it as a symptom was is the vegan movement. I'm not against vegans at all. I don't want to put that out before anyone comes after me. But what I've seen happen a little bit with the vegan, anything that becomes popular, and I'll use avocados. I don't want to use avocados as an example. The more people are eating and consuming avocados, the more we're consuming almond milk and cashew milk and even coconut milk. All of this increase in consumption in attempts to kind of do better for the environment, because that's not really the root of the issue. We end up just repeating the same exact patterns, but using something that looks a bit greener, right? So it's the same patterns of greed and consumerism. It's the same approaches of kind of wiping out particular areas of rainforests to enable to kind of plant avocado trees or plant almond trees, or removing it from the local people, particularly when we speak about things like quinoa, where the price of quinoa has increased so much that locals can't even consume it. All of these things are just repeating the same problems, but just using something a bit greener. And that's what really brought it home to me, that's the root problem is not eating meat or plastic. These are just huge symptoms, which we need to definitely address. Don't get me wrong, we definitely do need to address. But anything that we do will just be ultimately a short-term plaster, which we need. But long-term, I really feel like we need to approach the root. And what we started to see was that the root for us, and I can only speak from an Islamic perspective and my experience with the Islamic perspective and my understanding, is this huge disconnect, right? Just disconnection. And that can be disconnection to nature, of course, number one, disconnection to the cycles of nature, disconnection to each other, right? Disconnection to just disconnection to ourselves. And ultimately what I saw is all of this being as a means of disconnection to Allah, right? Disconnection to the divine, disconnection to God, disconnection to anything other than self, if that makes sense. Like we centered ourselves. So with this understanding, I started to realize when we remove God from the picture of community and remove God from the picture of nature, it kind of leaves us in this space of ownership. And I speak a lot about this because particularly within, I think, all the Abrahamic faiths, the idea of stewardship is so important. That as people, as humans, we have been appointed and honored with the role of stewardship. And the misunderstanding how that can be easily misunderstood from stewardship to ownership, right? From stewardship to dominion. Like we're dominions over all of it, so we own it. And moving away from this understanding that Allah has blessed us with, Allah has blessed us with this role of being caretakers of the earth. And at this point, I'll try and, if I can even see how small this is, but I will try and read one of the an ayah, a verse from the Quran, which is saying, Allah is the one who has placed you as a successor on earth and elevated some of you in rank over others, so that he may test you with what he has given you. Surely your Lord is swift in punishment, but he is certainly all forgiving and most merciful. And in this, although I've said it in English, the term that is used instead of successor, the Arabic term, what they've translated to be a successor, is actually Khalifa, right? Khalifa, which is stewardship, the stewards of the earth. And in this ayah, in this verse, it's saying Allah has given us that role as being a steward, but also there comes a responsibility with that, right? There's that we're going to be asked, we're accountable for that. And it goes on to another hadith, another saying, another ayah, another verse in the Quran. Indeed, we offered this trust of the earth, this trust to the heavens and to the earth and the mountains, but they all declined to bear it, being fearful of it, really like truly knowing the responsibility of it. But humanity assumed it, for they are truly wrongful to themselves and ignorant of the consequences. So again, it's just kind of making sure that we have this awareness that the role of stewardship, the role of khilafah, is an honorable role. It's so honorable for us to have this role, but we need to be held accountable, and we will be held accountable. God will ask us, right? What did you do with this honor that I gave you? What did you do with this trust that I gave you? This amana, right? We call it amana. What did you do with this trust that I gave you? And we're going to be we're going to have to answer to that. So yeah, Bismillah, that's kind of held me accountable in a way that kind of made me realize that this idea of green deen, this idea of nature-centered, environmental-centered, it's not something that's a particular interest. It's not because I'm just a green person, or as some would call, like a tree hugger, which I am, totally a tree hugger, but it's not something that it's seen as a separate interest. This is something that's rooted so heavily and so deeply within my deen, within my religion, that every part, every ritual of my religion, every aspect, every conversation, a lot of the Quran, when you read the Quran in English or even in Arabic, a lot of the Quran it mentions so much about nature and uses nature in a comparative way. All of it is rooted so much in nature, to a point where the Quran are the words of Allah, it's the verses of Allah, the signs of Allah, and so is nature. If you see nature as a sign of Allah, everywhere you look, you're seeing signs of Allah. And for us, that's where we started to have the idea of remedying some of that disconnection that we had. A big part of also recognizing how to heal this disconnect is to really acknowledge and name fully what kind of caused that disconnection in the first place, right? And I'm going to mention a few things for me and for the tribe, but if there are any other things, I'm happy for you to kind of just write in the chat, and I'm that we can even add to this list. So these are just a few things that I've mentioned. Like I said, this disconnection overall, our understanding of what stewardship is, and I think that's important for those that look to sacred text, for us to have an understanding and to read it with that understanding. A big part of how we got into the space of disconnection is removing God, in our understanding of removing God and centering self, right? And it's a very natural thing, particularly in Western societies, is to remove God from a lot of the conversations and center self, be self-sufficient. In order to be self-sufficient, sometimes we forget that there's more than us. That's what I think when I'm saying centering self, is not knowing that there's more than us, right? Knowing that there's something more, and not seeing other than yourself, if that makes sense. Another big part that we recognize, particularly as a tribe who work with predominantly the Muslim community and predominantly people of color, but to be honest, in all aspects, is to recognize the impact of colonization, right? Of colonization and the legacy of colonization, and what that has done to the colonizers, but then also those that have been colonized, and how much of an impact that has had on our relationship with land, how much of a disconnect it is to go onto somebody else's land and take ownership. But then in my case, also as a descendant of those that were taken from Africa, to actually remove people from their land and put them somewhere else. And that you will see that there will be examples of that in all cultures and in all parts of history. And I think it's really important for us to recognize how much of a disconnect that will have, and how that's passed on from generations and generations. Because if we don't recognize it, if we don't name it, how are we supposed to kind of step into a space of healing it? Also, another thing I'll just mention is this idea of interconnectedness. I did mention it briefly about, removing God from the center. For us, there's a concept that one of our principles is called Tawheed, which is basically the oneness of Allah, knowing that there is nothing but God, right? There's no you, no me. Ultimately, when we all get down to it, there's just God. And that oneness also means that everything in creation, you connect back to being a sign of God and recognizing that God is everywhere, right? God is everywhere in that respect. But also to kind of take it further from that as well, to understand it in a different aspect, is also the interconnectedness between us and the land, us and nature. Having an understanding that our emotional and physical and spiritual state will impact our surroundings and vice versa, right? And to be honest, I don't consider that to be, an unusual concept at all. It's kind of something that we all have experienced in some way or the other. And we can also see and understand that when we look at what's happened regarding nature and the environment and what the destruction that's happening at the rate that it's happening, I always ask that question: what is the state of a society? What is the spiritual state, right, and the emotional state of a society that can do what we're doing, and happily do what we're doing, right? What is the emotional, spiritual, and even physical state of a society that allows this to happen, and has allowed it to happen for centuries, to be honest, and not step into a space of healing, right? From my perspective as a healer, that's a chronic condition that really needs rooting out, really needs to be pulled out. And I think it's important for us to recognize that our state will have an impact on our surroundings, and vice versa. It's like the chicken and the hen, right? The surroundings will also have an effect on our spiritual and emotional state as well. Also, there's this disconnect that we're looking at when it comes to cities and urbanization. One of our teachers was saying, I'm a proper East Londoner, and there's a lot, even in East London where I am now, there's a lot of development that's happening, constant, really development. Any patch of land, we're going to build something. We're going to build affordable housing, family affordable housing. So there's constant building and constant development, which by all means, there's definitely aspects which are needed for our communities. But there's also, in building, the way that we've built our cities, the architecture of our cities is again a constant reminder of what man can do, right? And I always say this to the ladies when we take them out into the retreats, we take them out into the wild. When you're in the wild, as people of faith, you are constantly reminded of what God can do, right? What you can see the creation and the beauty of God, right? Once you're in, it's clearer. You can see it in the cities too, but it's clearer and it's more obvious to us in the wild, in the nature. And for us, is a big part of it is removing us from nature, remove us from our nature, so to put it. So what we do at the Green Dean is, and I'll share a few pictures so you can have a look. What we're doing at the Green Dean is starting to try and embody ways of healing that disconnection, right? And this is going to look like different things to different people, but a big part of that is, like I said, is stepping into the space of reverence, and stepping into a space of understanding and acknowledging that there is a sign of Allah everywhere. I'm just going to share my screen if I'm able to do this. Okay. So these are just a few imageries of the retreats. I must say, at the moment, the retreats are predominantly, only for Muslim women, but that's not exactly, we're not going to limit ourselves to just Muslim women, but at the moment, that's how it's been for the past 5 years. So the seven heavens and the earth, one of our ways of healing is by acknowledging and knowing that everything in nature is a reflection of a sign of Allah and the beauty of it. And there's an ayah, there's a verse in the Quran that actually says the seven heavens and the earth and whatever is in them exalt him, exalt and praise Allah. And if you have that recognition that this tree or this river or this mountain or this plant or this flower or this seed is in remembrance of the divine, is in remembrance, is in praise of the divine, it kind of puts you in a state of reverence, right? It puts you in a state of awe. It puts you in a state of respect, knowing that the harm that you do to this tree, the harm that you do to this river, is actually affecting its remembrance of the divine. It's affecting its purpose. It's affecting the balance that God has created in everything. Just some more. I've just added some more. This is like a picture dump, so I've just added some more pictures, and I'll explain a little bit of what we do when we take these ladies out into nature. Is that we allow for an experience to happen, right? That's all we're doing, is that we're taking a huge bunch of maybe about 20 to 25 ladies, predominantly urbanites as they call themselves, but London or big cities, mostly ones that have been in city dwellers. We take them out into the wild, we take them out into nature, and we spend that time and allow that time for that connection to happen, right? We allow for that connection to happen, and that's what we're asking for, is that time. Is that time for that connection to happen. We do prayer together. We make nature a place of prayer, and that's one of the biggest things that we always approach. Is when did prayer be confined to four walls, right? When did that become a thing? You know, when did it only become that I can only pray when I'm in the mosque? I can only pray when I'm in, you know, the temple, the church, the synagogue. This is such a foreign concept to all of those kind of all of our faiths. For all of us, nature has been a place of prayer, because it's constantly in prayer and we're just joining in. So in order to do that, we take them out, we facilitate that, and that also includes being in spaces of silence and deep listening, as I keep on saying, listening to the signs of Allah, listening to the signs of God, deep listening, but also allowing them to receive healing from the land, and allowing them to recognize where we can, also allowing them to recognize the knowledge of the land, learning about the land. Another thing that I've mentioned before is the importance of knowing the land that you're on. For many of us who come to these retreats, it's a space of, most of us are coming from immigrant families who have been kind of moved from one country to this country, and there's still that disconnect of belonging to this land, right? And a big part of doing that is, so there's no reverence for the land, because it's not our land. You know what I mean? And then when you go into nature, you're constantly told that this is not your place, particularly if you're a woman who's wearing the hijab, right? Particularly if you don't look the part, this is not your place, and you need permission to be in this place. So by doing this, we take the group into a place where it's like, this is our land, because this is the land, this is creation from Allah, so it has a belonging, we have an affinity to it, we have a connection to it. And let's start there. Let's start learning the names of the trees, right? Let's start learning the names of the plants and the rivers. Let's start learning this, because then we can hold it into a better space of reverence, right? And also on top of that, what I will say, just to kind of close up, what I will say is, in addition to that, a big part of what we're trying to do is two things: is acknowledge and recognize and revive culture and historical practices that are found in all traditions, and honor those, because our grandparents, our parents have all had connections to the land that we really want to revive and reconnect to. And number two, everything that I'm saying has made it very much about our connection, right? It's made it very much about, okay, my spiritual state, my spiritual connection to the land, my spiritual connection to God. But I also want to say that a big part of this is accountability. And I would never want what I'm saying to be used in a way where this is removing accountability for the big corporate companies and the big, the governments and those that are doing the mass damage. I don't think this is taking that accountability away from them. But what I am hoping is that by approaching activism, particularly nature and environmental activism, in this way, it's hopefully going to be a bit more sustainable. It's better to inspire through love than through kind of shame and guilt. Shame and guilt will do really quick responses, but we're hoping that this way of deeper connection will have our generations from now and from further generations will really be rooted in the land and rooted in the place and have a sense of rooted land and place. Thank you so much. I'm just going to stop. There's a few other things I wanted to share, but if maybe that's something that might come up in some of the questions, but I'll hand back over to Rose. Thank you.
Yeah, so it's a great pleasure to introduce Reverend Fletcher Harper, who is Executive Director of Interfaith. A pioneer of the global religious environmental movement, Fletcher helped spearhead the faith-based fossil fuel divestment movement, organizes faith turnouts at major climate mobilizations, and is a co-founder of SHINE, an international campaign that supports women and community-led renewable energy access initiatives in Africa and India. He's also the author of Green Faith, Mobilizing God's People to Protect the Earth. Thank you so much for being with us this evening. Really looking forward to hearing what you have to say. Thank you.
No, thanks to all of you. To be completely honest, it's always a minor miracle when someone from the United States gets invited to speak at an international gathering nowadays, given our national behavior over the past 4 years. It's a little bit shameful, but it's wonderful to be with you. Real shout out to Interfaith Glasgow for hosting this, and thanks so much for the chance to be with you. Shout out to my friend Adrian Shaw of the formerly of the Church of Scotland, who's been doing this work for, since all of us have been much younger, and great thanks to Rabia for an incredible, inspiring, calming presentation, which just resonated so deeply. It's wonderful to hear people talking about this stuff. So what I'd like to do, will I be able, Magdalene, to share my screen? Because I've got a few slides that I'll pop up periodically. If that's possible, and what I would like to do is to talk with you all about our sense of where things are at, what needs to be done that's not currently being done, and what's the role of spiritual and religious communities in that picture. And I'll have some very specific recommendations and an invitation for you all into a global multi-faith event. I want to apologize up front. My voice is a little bit raspy. I've been told by doctors that I have polyps on my vocal cord, which come from talking too much on Zoom calls. So at any rate, that's what accounts for the odd sound. So we all know that we're facing, a truly dangerous, serious situation. And if we dig deep, we know that we feel a sense of discomfort, anxiety, concern, fear, anger, despair. It's a really complicated and difficult collection of feelings that are associated with it. And we can say this now. It was not true even as recently as 5 to 7 years ago. Yes, on the scale that's true now. Yes, there were people who were concerned, but this is starting to impinge on people's mindsets on a regular basis. And it is precisely our religious and spiritual traditions that give us the strength to turn towards these challenges and these feelings and not away from them. And as we look sort of straight in the eye of what's going on, we'd like to suggest that there are 3 existing centers of power, centers of authority that underlie where we're at and the problem that we face. The first, and Rabia referred to this, the first is the global economy dominated as it is by extractive industries. We're dominated to the extent that it is. Whether it's coal or oil and gas companies, different types of agribusinesses or mining enterprises, which are responsible for massive levels of deforestation. We see these companies, we see that for the most part, they are wholly unrepentant in terms of their approach to their businesses, certainly not serious about changing them at anything approaching the scale that's needed. And their operations at a scale far beyond the individual is devastating the planet. So if you take the extractive economy on the one hand, another sort of center of power that needs to be reckoned with is governments that range from the mildly ineffective to the outright oppositional. If you look at what the United States has done over the past 4 years under the Trump administration, from a moral perspective, it's very difficult to fathom. It is just flat out wrong. And there is a knowing wrongness to this at this point. You see similar trends in Brazil where Jair Bolsonaro, just I think 3 days ago, his administration tried to put forth a climate change commitment to present in Glasgow in next November that made no mention of reducing deforestation. There is, as I said, there's a knowing wrongness to this, and you have governments. Certainly from a U.S. perspective, what the EU is trying to do is steps ahead. Even in the global leaders, for the most part, the level of commitment is not adequate. And I say that not to be a scold, but to be real about what's happening. I think one of the things that we as religious and spiritual people owe the world is a sober, direct look at where we're really at, and not to mince words and not to get sort of seduced into sort of climate happy talk where we, try to keep ourselves afloat emotionally by pointing to indicators of progress. There is some progress and it's important. It's not nearly enough though. So extractive industries, governments, problematic governments. The third factor that we don't see discussed very much is extremist cultural and religious forces, which in some very substantial geopolitically important geographies around the world are not neutral on this issue. They are lining up on the side of the ineffective or oppositional governments and extractive industries. So again, you look at Brazil, and the Brazilian government, apart from Bolsonaro, is largely controlled at the legislative level by what's called the evangelical bench in Brazil. And they are firmly on the side of the deforestation forces within the country. You look at the US, the evangelical Christian community is strongly allied with oil and gas interests. And so these three centers of power, government, industry, extremist cultural and religious forces, to us constitute an interconnected nexus that is dragging us fast in the wrong direction. Too often we think religious and spiritual people are hesitant to call out the third problem directly because we don't want to give offense either to people of our own faith or people of different faiths, because we value building interfaith bridges and relationships. From our perspective, we have to have this conversation publicly because religious groups are the only group credibly that can take on other religious forces. So while it's not easy, we think that we must really have this conversation publicly. And what we see in so many places is that these same anti-climate religious groups often share values with anti-immigrant groups, with groups that are opposed to protections for racial and religious minorities. So there is a worldview and a mindset here that has to be interrogated at a public level. And there's nobody that can do that except for the types of people who are on a call with Interfaith Glasgow. We can do it thoughtfully. We can do it in a feisty manner. Pick your style, but it has to be done. So in the face of these big things, what do you do? And we are at Green Faith very, very big believers in the power of unapologetically bold religious leadership and positions on these issues. There is a strong and a good religious sort of community working out of established religious lineages and sects and denominations that do a very important job of playing the inside game at different governmental and intergovernmental forums and negotiations. And they play an important role. We think that one of the important missing ingredients is a mass grassroots multi-faith dimension, which is uncompromising in the positions that it takes in terms of what's needed to solve the problem, that is unafraid to talk about issues that are politically inconvenient or that seem politically infeasible. And it's out of those kinds of bold, on the margin voices that the vision that's needed for the future emerges. Over the past year, we've been tremendously excited to work together with a number of grassroots religious multi-faith groups in 14 countries. And here's where I'll try to do a screen share and give you a few. So here's a map. I realized for some reason I don't, England, the UK is one of the 14 countries. I do not know why there's not a red dot on the UK. Please chalk it up to technical incompetence and no subliminal message. But these are the countries. In addition, Uganda is missing and should be shoehorned in there in between Kenya and Zambia. But these are the countries where grassroots people of diverse religious and spiritual communities doing multi-faith climate and environmental work have come together and have formed a global multi-faith climate and environmental network that's calling itself the Green Faith International Network. In the UK, our wonderful partners are at Faith for the Climate Network, based in London. In Canada, it's our good colleagues at Faith in the Common Good. In Brazil, the Institute for the Study of Religion. In Chile, a brand new Interreligious Climate Alliance. In Australia, the Australian Religious Response to Climate Change. In South Africa, SAFSE, the Southern Africa Faith Communities Environment Institute. And then in the other countries, just sort of new formations coming into existence because this is a new movement. This is still young enough that it's not yet institutionally widespread. And the purpose of this network is to help foster local organizing, local grassroots, multi-faith climate and environmental leadership. And I'm going to say a little bit more about what this network did. So about a month ago, the network did an official launch on November 17th and 18th. Maybe some of you were there. We did 6 online TEDx events around the world. And it was just it was a blast. That's in the US, that's an expression we use to say it was a lot of fun. I'm not sure if that translates well or not, but it was just great. Music, people praying from different traditions, reading sacred texts, stories of grassroots leaders from different faith and religious traditions, what they were up against, a really, really passionate engagement. And because the network didn't just want to make an administrative announcement of, oh, here's a network, the network's partners developed 10 demands. And these demands are bold. These are like sort of no messing around demands. And what I will say is that some people, and I'll bring them back up in a sec, some people will say, oh, this is just totally unrealistic. It's not politically feasible. So let me tell you a story. 8 years ago in New York City, along with many, many other groups, Green Faith got involved in a campaign to press the New York State pension fund, which is one of the world's largest, to divest from fossil fuel holdings. And everybody said it was impossible. You know, it was too big. No fund this big had ever done it. And the sole trustee of the fund, and there is just one trustee, had made it publicly clear that he had no time for divestment, that he was very much in favor of engaging shareholder engagement with the fossil fuel sector, on and on and on. And we just, I think the best way to describe what happened is that collectively this coalition had faith. And so we persisted. We argued, we debated, we fulminated, and then we sort of rinsed and did the cycle again. And it was a long, deliberate, persistent pressure campaign. Along the way, New York City divested from fossil fuels. That certainly helped. You saw more and more groups globally doing this. And just last week, the comptroller of the state's pension fund, not wanting to be outdone, there's an element for some friendly competition here, emerged publicly and said that not only would the state of New York divest its fossil fuel holdings, but would also establish extremely strict criteria for divesting from other companies and industries that were not meeting Paris compliant standards for business operation. This was a massive, massive victory. It sends an incredibly loud signal to capital markets that the beginning of the end has arrived for the fossil fuel sector. And we just remember how often people said it wasn't possible. I think that one of the biggest things that the religious community needs to do is to be bold. Massive problems require visionary solutions. And of all people, we should be unafraid to articulate what we believe is essentially a sacred vision, a dream of God about what the world darn well ought to look like. So going back to the demands, you'll see here, 100% renewable energy for all people. There are 800 plus million people around the world who lack access to energy. The fossil fuel sector is sprinting to get them hooked, just like the tobacco industry headed for Africa as soon as it got into trouble in the global north. We have to press values-driven investors to make money available so that those people get access to renewable energy. I'm not going to go through all of these jobs and healthcare for all. We know, let's be real. We know that in a transition like this, there are going to be some communities that will be negatively impacted because they're dependent on the fossil fuel sector in a way that's going to change. And we know that there will be some workers who will be affected. So we need to be darn sure as religious communities that we're arguing forcefully for a just transition for those workers so that they get income maintenance, healthcare maintenance, retraining, an opportunity to create a new life. It's not their fault that they worked in an industry that ended up needing to go into a managed decline. Society needs to do right by these people. And, just to sort of pull up a little bit more language, here's another one. We know that there are a flood of refugees coming. Let's be real. We are not going to stop every impact of climate change from happening. We know that there will be large numbers of refugees. And, in my tradition, in the Christian tradition, there's not a hero in the Bible worth his or her salt who isn't a refugee or a migrant. Come on, we need to be saying we have to say to our governments, because God knows politicians won't say this because they're afraid to death. They know it, but they're afraid to death. We have to say, we need a society that's going to welcome these people. And we have to lead the way on that. So, it's this kind of, it's this sort of kind of thing. Just a few more here, which is this next one. No new fossil fuel exploration or infrastructure, no new industrial agriculture or deforestation, no more habitat or biodiversity loss. Is that bold and hard? Sure, it's bold and hard, but it's what we need. If you read the science, this is what's needed. This is not just a sort of activist pipe dream. This is what's required. Similarly, we want bold religious leadership, real sustained action. This is what all of you have been involved in for so long. So I'm going to wrap up by inviting all of you. The network, it issued these demands, a couple of thousand people collectively on the calls and listening in. And what the network's partners did, from these places all over the world was to say, we're going to ask and invite religious, spiritual people around the world, and frankly, anybody else who wants to join in, to take part in a big global multi-faith day of action called Sacred People, Sacred Earth. And I'm going to try to pull a special maneuver. Well, I'll put in the chat, there's a place that you can sign up if you'd like to learn more about that. We had our first training yesterday for about 250 activists who were planning events. So essentially what we're inviting people to do is for religious institutions to ring their bells, sound their gongs, sound their chimes, blow the shofar, blow the conch shell, chant or meditate in public, do whatever you do to say to people from your tradition, listen up, this is serious. We need real leadership and we won't stand down until we've got it. What's missing from our perspective, from religious engagement around these issues, is that we're all starting to sound a little bit too much at times like the UN. We're all learning to sort of use and there's nothing wrong with the UN, but God knows they need what we in New York City call street heat. They need us at the grassroots, really making it clear that there are enormous numbers of people who are ready to stand up and to say things need to change. And until we get that level of mass participation, we're not going to get the change that we need to see, because right now, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, right now, this movement is not strong enough to win. And that's not acceptable. So I hope like crazy, I want to do some questions, some back and forth. I've lost track of time. I hope we've still got a few minutes. I'm very, very grateful to Interfaith Glasgow for letting a New Yorker come on and rant and rave for a few minutes. And I really appreciate the chance to be with all of you, and glad to answer any questions, hear any critiques, whatever, for as much time as we have.